Okay, cool. Sorted. Yeah, recording. And so, yep, we'll start off with a bit of revision, guys. So cool. So from last week, so what is the fundamental difference between AC and DC current? So that's the basics of it. So yeah, AC or alternating current regularly changes direction, reversing polarity, whereas DC direct current flows in one consistent direction with constant polarity, whether that is negative or positive, because you can get negative DC, or at least you can if you use your multimeter probes around the wrong way. Cool. So, what happens to the induced voltage in a coil when it rotates within a magnetic field? What happens to the induced voltage in a coil when it rotates within a magnetic field? So, yeah. So, as the coil rotates within a magnetic field, the flux changes continuously. It induces an alternating voltage, which regularly reverses polarity every half turn, forming a sine wave or voltage. So, even if we take a closed loop, sorry, an open loop, and we rotated it inside a magnetic field, if it was an open loop, we would still see voltage because we would see a potential difference, but we would have no current flow. So we only get current flow when we have voltage and a complete circuit. So we can have voltage, but without a complete circuit. So think of it like a battery. Even when current isn't flowing, we still have 12 volts or 24 volts at a battery. So you can have voltage without a current flow. So just remember that you can have voltage with no current flow. So if a sine wave has a peak voltage of 325 volts, what is the RMS voltage? All good, Jack. Yeah, as long as you just remember, guys, as long as you're posting in the chat every once in a while when I ask questions, it counts towards your attendance because we do mark down if you guys kind of just sit in there. It's what we call ghosting. If you guys do that, we do note down that you didn't participate. unless you email me because the chat's broken. Yeah. So yeah, Sasha, you're pretty much bang on there, 229.78. But for ease, we just put 230. Yeah, RMS is in New Zealand is considered 230 volts. Cool. So now we've got the revision out of the way. Anyone been up to anything interesting at work? What have you guys been doing over the past week? Oh, nice. I was gonna say, do you have a photo? Yeah, renovation, lots of heat pumps, solar panels, internet work. Oh, okay. Oh, like fiber. Nice, Thomas. That sounds cool. 220 kV bus switch maintenance at the switch yards, I'm assuming. Nice. Oh, okay. Oh, shit, case. Fuck, that sucks. What'd you do? Popeyes. Where is this new Popeyes? Oh, fuck. Do you know how long till surgery? Oh, I don't want to drive. Oh, man, we're going hard. I don't want to drive to Palmy. I had it while I was in Auckland. It was pretty fucking good. Oh, yeah. For the new bipolar. Hey, what's cool? Yes, Jack. The important question: do you get free Popeyes? No date yet? Fuck. So, Case, does that mean you probably won't be able to do block course, or what's up with that? Oh, well, good thing. Um, it might be difficult with your hand. Yeah, I would talk to your TA at first instance, because if there's a risk, if there's a chance you might not be able to do the skills, it might be better to, or if it's going to do more damage, it might be better to wait for that. Actually, could you send me an email and CC Mark Webster and on it and just put in the um, subject line year one block course and just kind of give us a brief update of what's like your situation, and then him and I can talk tomorrow and then we can sort it out because I'd rather you um, be able to do your best and not injure yourself further. Yeah, sweet. Thanks, Case. Cool. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about AC generation and alternator operation. Um, it's going to be a little bit of what we did last week, just kind of refresh things as well as add some new information in there. So first, we'll talk about a DC generator, the construction and principles of how it works. So what do you guys understand about a DC generator? What is it? Generates DC. Not quite. Other than generating electricity, so how does it generate electricity? What does it do? What are the moving parts? It does generate electricity, it generates DC. Works on the same principle as a motor, yeah. Okay, cool. So a DC generator, it's an electrical machine. It converts mechanical energy into direct energy, direct current, electricity. The process is based on the principle of electromagnetic induction, where a conductor moving in a magnetic field generates an electromotive force. The induced EMF drives the flow of current in the generator circuit, providing DC power. No, it's technically not self-induced. It's electromagnetic induction. It's not technically self-induced. So either you will have a magnet spinning inside of a coil to generate electricity, or you'll have a coil spinning inside of a magnet. In the case of a DC, yep, diesel generator is one form. So an alternator generates AC, which we'll talk about. But a DC generator normally has a battery, a little backup battery, which creates a DC current flow, which creates a magnetic field in either the rotor or the coils, usually in the rotor. Then that rotor spins inside the coil, creating a magnetic field. But we'll first look at some components. So the standard DC generator components. So an armature is the cylindrical iron core mounted on a shaft, laminated to produce eddy currents, and then coils of insulated copper wire are wound around the core, which rotate within a stationary magnetic field. So this is what it looks like. So you can see the armature stack there. So that armature stack is what absorbs the magnetic field that's rotating around it. And then you've got the winding coil inside of that. So the coils run up and down the motor and are all made up of insulated copper wire. So it's insulated with a lacquer, so that way there's no electrical connection between any of the windings, but there is a magnetic connection. Cool. So then you've got the commutator. So it's made of copper segments insulated from each other, and the shaft it's attached to the armature. It reverses electrical connection each half turn to ensure current flows in one direction externally. So you can see there the bottom of the winding coil, which is connected to the commutator bar, which is connected to the armature shaft. So this is what spins inside of the motor and the generator. Cool. So you've got your brushes. So these are normally carbon or graphite blocks positioned to maintain contact with commutator segments. It transfers current generated in the armature to external circuits while accommodating rotation. So you see the image there. As that rotates, the when the coil is in line with the magnetic field, it's no longer being cut, and so it transfers from one segment to the other. So because they continually switch which brush is connected to it, and the uh, current flow is always in the same direction. So as we add more commutator segments that are touching smaller brushes, we get a more constant DC waveform. And then we have the field magnets. So these provide a stable magnetic field. They can be permanent magnets or electromagnetics, placed stationary around the armature. So you get a north and a south. And as the armature rotates inside of that magnetic field, that's how uh, the EMF or voltage is induced. And the only reason we have current flow is because we have an external circuit connected to that winding. Cool, so this is what it would physically look like. So you've got your shaft and bearings. The armature sits inside of the, so you've got the pole, shoe, and field windings, which are your DC excited magnetic field. You've got the frame or the yoke. You've got the commutator at the back, and you can see up the top there a brush. So this is what a cutaway of a DC generator would look like. So this would be connected to either a wind turbine, a wind blade, or the output of gearbox of a petrol engine, like for your petrol DC generators. So most of your the generators that we use with diesel generate DC, and then they use switch power supplies to provide AC. Cool. So now we'll have a look at single loop 2-pole alternators. So some of the components of these is you've got your rotor, which is a loop of wire fixed to a rotating shaft, cutting through the magnetic field lines. Your stator is a stationary component, either containing a coil winding to capture induced voltage or holding magnetic poles. You've got your slip rings. They're continuous rings connected to rotor ends to maintain uninterrupted electrical contact. And just like your alternator, you've got brushes, which are the stationary carbon brushes that make contact with the slip rings, transferring the induced alternating current externally. So this is what your basic one loop alternator looks like. So as you can see, one of the main differences between your generator and your alternator is we have slip rings instead of a commutator. So this slip ring here is always connected to this end of the wire, and this one connected to this end of the loop. So as the loop rotates and that current goes backwards and forwards, we get our alternating current. So this is a very inefficient alternator, seeing as we only have one wire loop. Realistically, the alternators, or we would call them generators at the generator stations, would have many more loops, and we would also have multiple phases of winding. So we would have 3 different sets of windings, all a lot larger, creating our 3-phase supply. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about the generator or alternator so far? Remember, guys, just move out of frame for a second. Only silly question is one that you don't ask. Cool. So this detail. So this is it in detail as we need to go. So I'm giving you guys the information they give me, which is what you're expected to know. So I can go through them again, but it's just there's not a lot of components when it comes to the alternators and generators. So if we look at the generator, so this armature is so the alternators. So the reason we study alternators is because alternators work the same as motors. It's just we're doing it in reverse. Instead of generating current, we are using current. So that's why we talk about alternators and generators now. And then next year, you guys will start looking at DC and AC motors. Does it get easier to understand and remember? Yes. once you guys have your heads around this stuff in level 1 or year 1, then when you move on to year 2 and you start talking about motors, you already know about alternators. It is a lot. The electrical field is one of the ones that does require quite a bit of study and knowledge. There's no getting around that. But you guys are almost at the end of year 1. And so, again, if there's anything you guys are struggling with, just make sure you say something in the chat so I can address it. Yeah, it's a iron cylinder core mounted on a shaft. Yeah. Yeah, it's coils of insulated copper wire wound around the core, which rotate in the stationary magnetic field. So this commutator here, so it's made of copper segments, and again, insulated from each other. If they were to start conducting, it would create quite a bit of havoc. And it's insulated from the shaft because we don't want the shaft is connected to the casing. So if the casing becomes live, we have an issue. And it reverses electrical connections each half turn to ensure current. So it does it more than each half turn. Because if you look here, these segments are quite tiny. So every time these the brush shifts to a different segment in the commutator, it's getting voltage and current from a different coil. So the idea is to always have the commutator segment that it's touching connected to the rotor that is cutting the magnetic field at 90 degrees. Because the coil that's cutting the magnetic field at 90 degrees will be the one with the most voltage induced into it. Like we looked at last week with the sine wave, 90 degrees is always the peak induced EMF. Cool. So is there anything anyone wants to ask about? Anything that's not making sense? Please just sing out. I know it's a lot harder doing this online than it would be if we were in person. Yeah. So yeah, so these loops here are the coils. Here might be a little bit easier. Cool. So if you see here, you've got the coil, which actually runs up here to the commutator. So these wires essentially form the coils as they come up and down. So this is the iron core, which absorbs the magnetic field. And then here are the coils, which have voltage induced into them. Then they all come back here. And you can see that these are individual copper segments, which would have a brush attached to, I would guess, a number of different segments to create, to have a decent voltage induced into it. Yeah, so a coil can be made up of 1 to 100 wires. It's just a loop of wire that runs from up here to the other end and then around to the opposite side of the same segment. So if you were to go from one side of the commutator to the other 180 degrees around this commutator, they would be connected together. So a coil is just a loop of wire that is connected from one end of the commutator to the other. That's what we call a coil. They are usually made up of finer wire because it's easier to induce a voltage into the fine wire. It's more often transformers where you will see a larger wire size, depending on whether it's a step up, step down. The iron core absorbs magnetic field, yep, and the coil gaining current by the core spinning. Yeah, so the coil gains current because it moves through the magnetic field that's being produced by the external magnet. Um, Hold on 1 second. So it's not a very clear image, but so here you see we have multiple different poles. So you can add more poles to create more magnetic field. Yeah, so instead of one rotation being from here to here, it would be from here, from one side all the way around. It would be from basically half a rotation. You would get the same voltage induced. So the coil spinning inside of the magnetic field is what creates the EMF. And if we have an EMF and a completed circuit, we know that to create current, we need a resistance. So that is the circuit. So as long as we have voltage and a resistance, we will have current flow. As long as we have a coil and a magnetic field, we can induce a voltage. And if we have an induced voltage and a resistance, we can create current flow. So the main difference between a AC alternator and a DC generator is the method of connection. So in a DC generator, we have an armature commutator. So we have the commutator and we have the brushes and field magnets. And an alternator, yes, any complete circuit will have some resistance, and that is what allows current to flow. No matter what, a piece of wire will always have some form of resistance. Even if the wire is 6 mil squared and only a meter long, there will still be a resistance. It will just be harder for us to measure it with our standard multimeter. And then just a heads up, guys, we'll be talking about impedance next week. So have fun with your tradesmen and ask them what impedance means. We won't talk about it this week, but from now we'll just talk about resistance. So instead of a commutator, sorry, an AC instead of the armature, we have the rotor. So AC, we have DC, we have the armature. AC, we have the rotor. What argument is that, Antonio? Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll go over what impedance actually is next week, versus resistance. But for now, you guys, we just need to know about the alternators and generators. So yeah, so we have the armature and a generator, but in a alternator we have it's called a rotor, which is basically a loop of wire fixed to a rotating shaft cutting through magnetic field lines, which is the same principle as the armature, but in this case we call it a rotor. And then we have the stator. It's a stationary component, either containing coil windings to capture the induced voltage or holding magnetic poles. So either we're spinning a magnet inside of the windings or we're spinning uh, a winding inside of a magnetic field. Generally speaking, in New Zealand, we use a spinning magnet inside of a stator with coils. So usually it's the rotating shaft itself that has a magnetic field induced, create an electromagnet created by a DC exciter, is what we call it. And then that spins inside of the coils in the stator. So, yep, the windings in the stator has a magnetic field spun against it from the shaft or the rotor inside, creating a voltage along the outside. And then we have slip rings, or continuous rings connected to rotor ends to maintain uninterrupted electrical contact. Again, we have brushes. They're stationary, they don't move. And so this is the most basic type of alternator you can have. That is the most basic type of alternator you can find. It's what we look at for this. Um, and this is the most basic one. When you guys get to next year, you guys do not need to know anything about this other than this is what a alternator should look like. So here you see you have your windings around the outside. This is where we generate the voltage and current, and this is the spinning magnet rotor. Okay, don't worry about what these two different types are, but this is more common when you go out into generation to power stations. This is what you're actually looking at. The size obviously depends on the size of the generator. Oh, sorry, power station. Yeah, so the hydro ones are massive. You could park a car inside of them if you were to take them apart. But for now, this is what you guys need to know. If you look through your SCORM packages, you'll probably see something quite similar. Yeah, cool. So this picture, does anyone have any questions while I sit here and drink my energy drink? Oh God. Yeah. Um, actually, yeah. Anyone else? What's your go-to energy drink? Mine is usually the Rainbow Sherbet Mother at the moment. But they didn't have any of that at the gas station, so I have to deal with this orange dreamsicle. Anyone else got a preferred energy drink? Or does anyone here prefer just good old coffee and tea? Jack, are you sure your name is not Kyle? Sugar-free Monster. Nice. Oh yeah, Mango Loco. Oh yeah. Gotta agree with you there. It's good. Oh yeah, Sasha with the healthy ones. Yep, fair enough. I think you get along with Mark, the LSM. Okay, so keep posting your favorite energy drinks as we carry on with this. Cool. So the general operation of the operation. So you've got good one, Jordan. So the rotor coil spins through the stationary magnetic field. Then the voltage peaks when the coil edges move perpendicular to the field lines, so maximum flux cutting. And then voltage returns to zero when coil edges align parallel to field lines. So continuous rotation generates a sinusoidal alternating voltage. So last week we looked at the sine wave. So this operation making sense to everyone. Yeah, so you guys don't need to know much past this. It's up to you guys whether you wanted to do some extra reading. I know when I did my apprenticeship, I was always kind of trying to read a bit more. Um, yeah, there is info out there, but just be careful of where you're checking your sources, because if it's stuff from America, it may not be applicable. Okay, and then we're going to quickly run through what we did last week because they want us to do sine waves again. But you guys have seen the sine wave. It goes up and down. Peak at 90, 0 at 180, inverse peak at 270, 0 at 360. So we looked at the properties. So if you examine the sine wave, you see that it starts at 0, goes to positive maximum, falls to 0 again, maximum negative, before falling to 0 again. So the maximum values or maxima are 90 and 270 respectively, because if we type in sine 90 degrees or sine of 90, it gives us a 1, and sine of 270 gives us a negative 1. So yeah, so the equation we use, BLV sine theta, we can reduce to BLV when theta equals 90. So we know that as multiplying the field strength by the length of the conductor by the velocity, which is BLV, at 90 degrees, we can just get rid of the sign because we don't need to worry about that. So maximum possible EMF for any particular combination of magnetic field, conductor, and rotational velocity. It is normally abbreviated to E, so capital E, instead of EMF. And then, so similarly, the equation BLV is abbreviated to negative E. And as we know that the negative maximum is equal to the positive, there's usually no need to calculate these two separately. And then we talked about the voltage peak versus peak to peak. So if they ask you for the voltage peak, it's the BLV at sine 90. And then if they're asking you for the voltage peak to peak, if you know voltage peak, you can just multiply that by 2. So this is an example we looked at again. So conduct a loop of this length. So we could do our calculation. This is all what we did last week. And then peak to peak is just 2 of voltage peak. So we know that it's double of the voltage peak. This should all look familiar from last week. We'll just go through it again just to give you guys a little bit more familiarity with it, because this is the kind of stuff that you will need to know in terms of the calculations when you come to do your capstone. And then we talked about the cycle and frequency. So who can remember what we talked about last week How long? So we know that the standard frequency in New Zealand is 50 hertz. So that's 50 times a second. How many milliseconds does it take for one sine wave rotation at that hertz, at that frequency? Anyone remember off the top of their head? Or remember how we calculated it? Yeah, 20 milliseconds. So we take 1 second and divide it by 50. Cool. I will be back in just 1 second. I just have to quickly go grab something off my desk. Cool, that's all done. So yeah, so we talk about cycle or period, we're talking about one waveform. And then when we're talking about frequency, we're talking about how many times it does it per second. So yeah, then we looked at it. So frequency of the electrical main supply in Great Britain and New Zealand that they generate is 50 hertz. So generators have to rotate at 3000 RPM. So as the main frequency is 50 hertz or 50 cycles per second, it follows that each cycle or period must take 1/50th. Time for one cycle is called cyclic or periodic time. And we can figure that out by time 1 over F or frequency 1 over T. 50 hertz. So if the frequency supply is 50 hertz, we can calculate the time. Yeah, 20 milliseconds. Yeah, so that's basically what the loop. So we think back to that loop generator that we were looking at. This is basically the loop generator. Those um, two dots there. They're basically rotating inside the magnetic field, giving us the AC waveform. So this is the most basic form of alternator. Or AC generator. We call it an alternator because it alternates the current. Is basically one loop of wire inside of a magnetic field spinning. This is the most basic type of alternator. You won't need to know the full-on specifications of alternators, like how many loops and things like that. The most you'll have to worry about is poles, which you will look at in year 2. And yeah, definitely year 2 subject. Cool. So instead of marking the horizontal axis in degrees, we can do it in seconds. So yeah, for one cycle of the frequency, 90 degrees is 5, and 180 is 10, 270, 15, and 360, 20, because we've already figured out 20 milliseconds. So if we divide 20 by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we get 5 millisecond gaps. So 5, 10, 15, and 20. And then we figured out how to figure out the voltage if we're given a angle. And then we were So if the peak is BLV and E is BLV sine theta, then we can have E as E sine theta. So I'm going to throw some numbers out there and then I want you guys to calculate. I'm just going to turn this off for a second. Cool. So if we give you a peak voltage of 500 volts, what is the instantaneous voltage at 27 degrees? So we've got a peak voltage of 500 volts. What is the voltage at 27 degrees? Yeah, so it's 226.995, or if you were to round up, 227, because if we go to two decimal places, we have to round the 5 up, which causes the 9 to round up, the 9 to round up, which gives us 227 volts. Cool. So we have a peak voltage of 500 volts. What is the instantaneous voltage at 165 degrees? Okay, I think you did something wrong there, Rex. So it should be 129.4. So it's 500 times sine of 165. That's how you type it into your, hold on. I'll stop sharing for a second. So yeah, that's basically what you should have ended up with. 500 times sine of 165, which gives you 129.409, which gets rounded to 41. All good. So yeah, it was 165 Rex. So all good. So now we have an instantaneous voltage at 30 degrees of 90 volts. What is the peak voltage? So at 30 degrees, we have a peak voltage of 90. Put that back up. Okay, Connor and Cody, how did you get that number? And Sasha, how did you get that number? So again, at 30 degrees, we have an instantaneous voltage of 90. Because we're looking at the instantaneous voltage, we can't use the same calculation. Yeah, Andy's got it. It should be 90 divided by sine of 30. So we take that 180 and multiply it by sine 30, we get 90. So yeah, we take our 90 volts and we divide it by sine of 30 because that's the instantaneous voltage. And okay. Good. Everyone can see this whiteboard? So if we have our equation E equals, and can I do this? E sine of the angle. So what we want to do is move these to either side. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll go this way. We'll go E sine theta, which gets rid from this side. Cool, but we want to find E. So what we do is we multiply both sides by E, which effectively gets rid of this. That's how we get our E over sine theta, small e over sine theta equals big E. Does that make sense when I rearrange it that way? Okay. Sasha, can you see the whiteboard that I've shared? Oh, damn. Is there anyone else who can't see the whiteboard? It might be the fact that it depends on whether, I guess. So yeah, basically to get that resulting formula of small e divided by sine theta, we take the small e equals sine theta, big E equals sine theta, okay, and we divide both sides by sine theta, essentially eliminating sine theta from the right-hand side and moving it to the left. So E equals E over sine theta, small e over sine theta equals big E. If you guys watch the video back, it'll be there. Yeah, maybe. If you guys can download Microsoft Teams, it would be a lot easier um, for you guys. Hold on. Right, Teams. What about now? Can you see that? Okay. So random tangent. So today I was actually not in the office because I was home doing adult learning level 4, and we talked about the theories of how we never stop learning as adults. And so this is me continuing to learn by using this software. There you go. Cool. So can't won't let me undo. So yeah. Yeah, so I'll redo it so everyone can see this time. Cool. So we take our small e equals sine theta e. So basically, if we take the small e and we divide it by, this is very laggy. Oops, what was that? Then we're basically dividing both sides by sine theta. So if we get rid of this sine theta, we're left with small e divided by sine theta, or our instantaneous voltage divided by sine of the angle. You're always measuring it in meters. The L in BLV is always measured in meters. So the standard base unit for all measurements is meters. Velocity is meters per second, and B is measured in Teslas, always. So E equals sine over small e over sine theta, or instantaneous voltage over sine theta, is equal to the max voltage. Is that clear for everyone? Anyone who still doesn't quite get it, let me know now because I can keep going. Okay, I will close that whiteboard. Okay. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. It's only a few more slides. We'll go through them quickly because you guys have all done this. So yeah, last week we looked at using time. So we talked about how we can do T equals 1 over F 1 over 50 to give us the 20 milliseconds. And then we can take our 50 hertz 20 milliseconds and divide 360. So if we divide that 360 degrees by 20 milliseconds, it gives us 18 degrees per millisecond. So then we can take our 4 milliseconds and multiply that by 18 degrees, which will give us 72 degrees. And we know that because E is equal to small e is bigger to big E sine theta, instantaneous voltage equals max voltage times sine of theta. We can calculate that based off of the peak voltage of 339.411. It gives us a instantaneous voltage of 322.799, which is like shown here on the graph. So this was just manipulating the calculations and facts we already knew to find instantaneous voltage in a different way. And they may ask this question, they may not. So because 1 millisecond is equivalent to 18 degrees, 19 is equivalent to 342. And we use that same calculation, but it gives us a negative voltage of 104.884, because if we type sine of 342 into our calculators, it gives us negative 0.309. So that's what that looks like on the graph. And then we talked about the root mean square. So the way we get the root mean square, because it's root mean square, we take the total instantaneous values of the sine wave, we square them, which means we take all of those negative values and they become positive. Yep, you could put negative E, not E negative. Negative E is equal to that. They will generally ask you for, because it'll be multi-choice, or you'll have to enter a value. It'll be E equals, and then you would put negative or positive. So yeah, So root mean square, we square the total, all the instantaneous voltages every 10 degrees, which turns all the negatives positive. We add them together. We divide them by how many measurements we took, so 36, and then we square root that, which gives us a value of 0.707 times the peak value. So 1 divided by the square root of 2 is what it actually equals to. So if we know the RMS value, we can find the peak value and then divide the RMS value by 0.707, which is the same as multiplying. Don't worry. So basically, in New Zealand, we have a RMS voltage of 230, which is what your meters read, but realistically, it's a max voltage of 325.3. So that's why we have to be wary of that. It's also why we use 500 volts to insulation resistance test all of our installations, because that is the max possible voltage that any one wire could be subject to. Okay, so that is us for tonight.